So I'm Ranger Mike Crowley. I'm a ranger here on the Cumberland Trail, and the story that I'm going to tell you is a good lesson in hubris, military tactics, and the dangers of us underestimating your opponent. It's about taking a stand, fighting for freedom, and striving for independence. So just to set the scene a little bit, in 1763, the British Parliament, in all their infinite knowledge, decreed no settlements west of the Appalachian Mountains. They had just come off the 7 Years' War. They had all this new land, but for whatever reason, they didn't want anybody going over there. There were some remaining French loyalists and Native American bands throughout the area, so they just didn't want to provoke it and attack again. So that's kind of like me getting a big bowl of candy and setting it on the table with my kids and walking out of the room and saying, don't take any of that candy. So, needless to say, a bunch of guys got stuck with their hand in the candy jar. So they all went over the mountain, which is where the name, the Over Mountain Men, came from. So these were just patriots, survivalists, to get away from all the war, all the cities. They came over here, over the mountain, they started thriving, talking about folks like Isaac Shelby, a handful of Sherrills, as we learned earlier, and John Sevier. Interesting side note to tie it back into the Sherrills about John Sevier is at the Fort Watauga a few years earlier, they were there, and a couple of the women were out milking cows outside the walls of the fort. They came under an ambush from the Native American tribe that was there. All the women went running back to the fort, and Catherine Sherrill realized she's a pretty good ways from the fort. Indians are coming in, everybody's yelling at her to get back. So she was known to be really tall and athletic. So she just sprints to the fort, climbs up the wall, essentially, ascends the wall, and who's there to grab her but John Sevier? So he grabs her and pulls her to safety. Short time later, they were married. John Sevier had 10 children from a previous marriage, and Catherine, who was known as Bonnie Kate after that day, gave him 8 more. So they had 18 children altogether. So in 1779, the British Empire started what they call the Southern Strategy. So they were going to do their Southern campaign. They had had mixed results in the North with battles. They'd won some and lost some, but they thought it was time to start moving south and start taking over down here. They really, really underestimated the Southern people. They thought they would come through and let them know, hey, time to come back to the king, flock to the banner. So that's one point they underestimated, the Southern people. Set the scene a little bit more. In 1780, the city of Charleston, which at that time was the 4th largest city in the colonies, Charleston fell to the British Empire. So that is the majority of the Southern Army right there. Not only troops, but ammunition, supplies, everything. So that's in the hands of the British right now. So when General Cornwallis took Charleston, he put Major Patrick Ferguson in charge of getting these Southerners on the side of the British. A little bit about Major Patrick Ferguson. He was well renowned as the best marksman in the British Army. So much so that he actually developed his own rifle. He was an amazing strategist. Tactically, he was well advanced. So to just give you a little bit of his forethought, he had 2 women that hang around his camp, did laundry for him. They were women of ill repute, as they say back in the day. Did laundry for him and other various needs that women of ill repute would do for you. And this man had the forethought to make sure that they were both named Virginia, so he never got caught up. So that's the kind of brilliance that this guy has. He joined the Army at 15 years old, which is just ridiculous. At the time of the battle, he was one of the highest ranked and highest tenured officers in the British Army. He was appointed as the inspector of the militia in South Carolina. His job was to, like I said, get all the Southerners to come back to Parliament. So he would go try to rally people. He didn't necessarily want to battle. He was trying to be persuasive and political about it. In one of his attempts to win the folks back over, he released a prisoner named Samuel Phillips. Samuel Phillips goes back to the Over Mountain Men, and there's a little conspiracy about this actually, and I find it very interesting. Samuel Phillips delivered a message, supposedly from Ferguson, that said he is going to hike over the mountain, hang their leaders, lay their country waste with fire and sword. So that's a pretty big threat. The only problem is Ferguson was notorious for his correspondence to Cornwallis. Any kind of move he made, any kind of decree that he was going to put out, he would let Cornwallis know. And there is no record of this decree to Cornwallis. So it could have just been lost in the mail, or it could be that Samuel Phillips just wanted to get the battle going and knew that that would do it. So he comes back and gives the decree that Ferguson set out. Initially, the Over Mountain Men didn't want to pick up arms. They were content with where they were. I mean, it's beautiful out here. They were living in the hills of the Western Carolinas and East Tennessee. They pretty much had it made as far as you could back then. Phillips comes over, delivers the message from Ferguson, so they start getting ready to rally arms. So said they're not all living together, so they got to communicate back and forth. So they decide to muster at Sycamore Shoals, and this would be September 25th, 1780. And I've got the Reverend Samuel Doak delivered a sermon the morning before they were going to leave, and I'd like to read it to y'all verbatim because I just think it's fantastic. So, my countrymen, you are about to set out on an expedition which is full of hardships and dangers, but one in which the Almighty will attend you. The mother country has her hand upon you, these American colonies, and takes that for which our fathers planted their homes in the wilderness, our liberty. Taxation without representation and the quartering of soldiers in the homes of our people without their consent are evidence that the Crown of England would take from its American subjects the last vestige of freedom. Your brethren across the mountains are crying like Macedonia unto your help. God forbid that you should refuse to hear and answer their call. But the call of your brethren is not all. The enemy is marching hither to destroy your homes. Brave men, you are not unacquainted with battle. Your hands have already been taught to war and your fingers to fight. You have wrested these beautiful valleys of the Holston and Watauga from the savage hand. Will you tarry now until the other enemy carries fire and sword to your very doors? No, it shall not be so. Go forth then in the strength of your manhood to the aid of your brethren, the defense of your liberty and the protection of your homes. And may the God of justice be with you and give you victory. So that's a rally call, if I've ever heard one. You got Samuel Phillips coming over saying he's going to come here, hang our leaders, destroy our farms with fire and sword. And then you have this just amazing sermon from Reverend Doe. So they all leave from Sycamore Shoals after they've mustered on the 26th of September. 1,000 patriots set out. Their mission is to hunt Ferguson down. Now this is a strange change in tactics from what they had been doing. They'd never really been on the offensive at all. Like I mentioned before, they were reluctant to take up arms initially. But now they're angry and they have a mission. So they begin this trek to find Ferguson. And it's between 200-300 miles, what they eventually hiked. A lot of them were on horseback, a lot of them were just hiking through the woods. And these are young boys, men, older men, all rally for the same cause. So after weeks of just trekking through this, they arrive at Gilberton, North Carolina, and they learn that Ferguson was there, but he was there a week ago. So they've been rained on, snowed on, hiked hundreds of miles, only to learn where they thought he was, they're a week late. So they spend the night at Alexander's Field, or Alexander's Ford, and they're thinking, let's just give it one more night, see what happens. So during that night, James William, another patriot, comes through with 1,000 more men to rally. So that brings it to around 2,800 total in this militia army. So to get there, they are all exhausted. It has rained, it has snowed. Of the 2,800, they go through and they pick the 900 best marksmen. Anybody who is able to hike, get on a horse, and head out. So they leave at 9:30 at night on the 26th. And of course, as soon as they leave, it starts just downpouring rain. So as they hike, I'm sorry, on October 6th, not September 26th. October 6th at 9:30, they leave out, it's raining. They finally get to Kings Mountain, where they learn that Ferguson has taken a position on top of the mountain. Now, just like you mentioned, I have a history in the military as an officer. Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, says, he who has the high ground has the advantage. As an officer in the military, that's what you're taught. Take the high ground. There's a number of reasons for it. Your field of view is open. You can mobilize. It's easy to retreat. Almost every time you want to take the high ground. This is one of those cases where you don't want to take the high ground. So what the over mountain men do is they break up into little separate armies. Kings Mountain is kind of like a bowling pin. If you were to set it on its side, it's kind of narrow and then it widens out. So they just surround all the points of Kings Mountain. And at this point, the British are using Brown Bess muskets. So these are, you can reload them fairly fast, but they're historically inaccurate. They're also firing downhill. So at 3 o'clock on October 7th, the first shot is fired. There's a lot of casualties going back and forth either way, but the British are continually firing over the heads of the Patriots. They're lined up in lines. They have a volley of one line go. They'll bring another one in. So they're slow and they're methodical. Meanwhile, the Patriots on the ground are using what they called it Indian play, or it's guerrilla warfare essentially. They're not in any kind of line. They're not in any kind of group really. They're all spread out. They're hiding behind trees. They're hiding behind rocks. They're using the long rifles that they hunt with, and they are just sniping the British left and right. So Ferguson, realizing that he's about to be beat, so you can read this either way, actually. So he gets on his horse, grabs his sword, and if you're British, he tried to break through the ranks. If you're American, he was trying to retreat, because it's going to look the same because he's surrounded. So either way, he's got to go through those ranks. One of the Virginias that he was accustomed with realized that her compatriot, the other Virginia, was killed by just some crossfire at the top of the mountain. She jumps on a horse, rides down, tells the Patriots, Ferguson's up top. He's wearing a red and white checkered shirt. The reason he wore the red and white checkered shirt was to hide his officer's uniform. But he chose a red and white checkered shirt to do this. Not a very good tactic as far as military goes. So Ferguson does his charge, trying to break the ranks or retreat most likely. They end up taking 9 bullets out of him. So he was shot 9 times on the way down. He had written a letter to General Cornwallis that was intercepted, and he said, "Not God Almighty or all the rebels in hell will remove me from Kings Mountain." Turns out to be true, because he's still buried on Kings Mountain. So he had the forethought to look that one through. So in the end, of the 900 Patriots that went, 28 died. 16 were wounded. On the other side, they had 300 killed, 150 wounded, and over 700 prisoners taken. So Thomas Jefferson himself said that the Battle of Kings Mountain turned the tide of the American Revolutionary War. It was one domino that set off many other dominoes that end at the surrender of Yorktown.
Where did that take place again?
1780.
1780.
Yes, sir.
You know the strength of the British force up there? What it was?
So it's kind of difficult to determine that. I mean, you can kind of tell by the number they had. So it would have been about 1,500. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Unless.
Then the Tories, of course.
Yeah, not just British troops, but Tories.
Sure. Yeah. The crazy thing is Ferguson is only a day's march from Cornwallis. So if he had just left and hiked out, who knows? We might not be celebrating independence.
It sounds like he was surprised by the militia force.
So that's what's not really clear, honestly. And it's crazy. He was surprised that they were able to move so quickly to catch up with him. He kept getting reports, hey, they're coming.
Yeah.
It could be that he just underestimated how fast they were moving. You know, they're from here, so they know these backwoods like nobody else.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of strange that that would be ideally a good stance to fight from on top of the mountain, typically. But he was kind of notorious for fighting in his own style. He's actually one of the first to wear a somewhat camouflage uniform, and he would actually fight in the guerrilla tactics previously.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of confused as to why he would resort back to just let's get all in a line and volley like we're fighting in a field.
And wear the red and white shirt.
And red and white
My
shirt.
guess is Virginia hadn't done the laundry.
Right.
One of them.
Yeah.
We needed green and white to blend in with the foliage.
Yeah, and that's what they would wear previously. Like they would wear a green muted uniform, and they would hide. And, they would fight like the Patriots fought. So it ended up being his downfall, but I don't know why he would resort back to that strategy.
Interesting.
Did you have anything to add?
Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
I've never been there, but I've got it on my bucket list.
Yeah, I mean, now I know where it's at, definitely.
It's actually only about 40 miles west of Charlotte.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, it's gotta be
40
close.
miles west of Charlotte, that's reachable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually do have a question. You said Tories? Well, I don't know what that is.
Tory was, a person living in North America, British subject who opposed the idea of the revolution, who was loyal to the king rather than to this revolutionary.
Yeah,
So they lived here, but they fought for the British.
Right.
in many ways, this was kind of a civil war battle because and it mentions that they were fighting neighbors and brothers sometimes. They're both on different sides.
Sometimes the Tories were favored by the British system. They had gotten land, or there was heraldry. Not so much over here in North America, I suppose. But there were people who had a stake in remaining the king's subjects. And others, I don't know what all their motivations might have been.
Okay.
But the motivations for the Patriots were very strong and honorable, and that's what brought us the first democracy in the world.
I have kind of an unusual question. Do you know what the Queen's name would have been at that time? I don't know.
That was Charlotte.
Was Charlotte?
So it's King George III.
Charlotte of Mecklenburg was his wife.
I thought maybe Tories came from like Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
That is wrong.
I don't know where that would come from.
I'm secretly a Tory.
But I didn't even know what Tory meant.
Where would
It's
the
okay,
name
it's time to
Tory
learn.
come from?
I had never heard that term
That's okay.
before.
Well, I think it was a group in England used that name too.
Yeah, which probably.
But I don't know why they used it over
Yeah.
here.
Interesting.
Yeah, they were also called loyalists.
That's it. In my history books, I think they were like just British loyalists is what I heard of them. Because that was Was this when there was like that big, just around the American Revolution where that, big like spy guy who was like up?
Benedict Arnold?
Yeah, is
Yeah.
that during like?
That was like previous in this year.
Okay, so like, yeah, so just a British.
Yeah,
lord.
18,
This is how-
1780 was going really bad for everybody, for the Americans at this point. So it was crucial to win this battle.
Oh, Paige, what branch of service were you in?
I was in the Navy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I could take a step back to up by the cave,
Mm-hmm.
Hyro is sacred, Glyphic is carving.
Oh, nice.
Okay, and I was going to look up how Tories came to be, but I had started to look this up and just now
Right.
popped up, so while it's there.
That's
so-
nice.
That's the best thing about Google.
But these are petroglyphs, so probably means rock carving.
Say it again, petroglyphs?
Petroglyphs.
Well, I
So
can ask
Petros
it.
is rock.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what he said, but I'm here, I got Petro, P-E-T-R-O.
The term used by the archaeologists for glyphs made with mud is mud glyphs.
Oh, that's
They
spelled
come
right.
up with any.
Can't think of a scientific name for mud.
Pteroglyphs.